Alright, so hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Spray and Pray 1000. Spray and Pray 1000? What the... Man, it's been so long since I've done this thing. It's kind of getting a little bit crazy, but you know how it is. Always underprepared for a podcast that's overly delayed. And in general, I got stuff going back as far back as December because I kind of took a little bit of a break from a lot of things for the channel. And now I'm kind of getting back in the swing of it, so I just wanted to really hop in. What I would like to do, if I'm really optimal, is once a week, you know, for like maybe 30 minutes to an hour, just talk about some gaming news and stuff so that way it doesn't pile up. Because in the past, I feel like that's always been a problem. However, at least for today, that won't be the case. This will be in the style of older episodes. And a lot of it is ranging from cool to awful. We'll try to go in order. I know a lot of these topics are very juicy, very pregnant almost. So I'll leave it at that. But to start off, first of all, welcome. Thank you for listening to the podcast. As always, it's made great by supporters like you. Not like this is a plug segment or anything, but just in general, do very much appreciate people who put the time out to listen to my thoughts on certain things. And I know I always have some hot, spicy takes, but you know how it is, right? In any event, in the latest of a long-running trend of both video game movies and, well, I would say movie video games, but those are kind of done. Oscar Isaac will star as Solid Snake in Sony's Metal Gear Solid film, which more or less is, I mean, it's nice to see his career is continuing after Star Wars, given the disaster that is the Star Wars sequel trilogy. What I think is more interesting is that Konami, of all people, are going forward with a Metal Gear Solid film. I don't think this will lead into more games necessarily. There's like maybe a 30% chance they might try to capitalize on it, but we're at the point now with a lot of these games and a lot of these studios where I have to ask, like, is it even worth, like, even if they do get another game, is it going to be the game we really want and we really expect? And I'd have to say probably not. I think that if we were to get anything else out of Konami for Metal Gear, it's not the same without Kojima, and it's certainly, the fans probably wouldn't receive it as well, given everything that's gone on with Kojima and kicking him out and the whole debacle, which really just left a bad taste in people's mouths. So I really don't particularly think this will lead into anything. If it does, I mean, cool, great, I wish him the best, but I kind of doubt it. I just think it's rather interesting that almost, what is it, like 20, almost 30? It's like 25, 26 years after the original Metal Gear Solid movie, or Metal Gear Solid movie. Yeah, that's a Freudian slip. The original Metal Gear Solid game, we're getting a movie. I guess some IPs that are just good as games are just too good to not capitalize on when they're turned into movies. I mean, obviously, the Prince of Persia movie was a thing, Assassin's Creed movie was a thing, and for what it's worth, I'll defend both of those. At least the latter is more for the people who play the games, and I don't know if they're ever going to really integrate it anymore into the video games. In 2016 and 2017, it was lit, because they integrated it directly into Origins. But will they integrate it again into the series? Probably not. So, we'll have to see what exactly happens. I'm sure this movie will be a direct port of the games. Obviously, the common criticism and view on Kojima games is that they're basically more or less movies due to their long-form narrative structure and, of course, the massive amount of cutscenes. So, do I have high hopes for it? Probably not. I'm just glad that it's happening in the most reluctant way I can say that possible. In the same vein as the Borderlands movie, which I may or may not have on here, the Borderlands movie I think will be awesome for one reason or another, and you know what I mean by that. It'll either be a good movie, which is always possible, or it'll be trash and we get to laugh at it. And that's not to say that the people they're getting on board for it necessarily spell doom for it. It's just, in my opinion, I'm not a big Borderlands fan. Shooter looters are cool. I prefer... Now, this is a saucy take. I prefer the Division 1, because I never really got through Division 2. My computer really doesn't run it too well. And I really did enjoy Division 1 for what it's worth. Now, granted, I played mostly the patches that were considered to be good. so maybe that's a little bit biased in my opinion. I almost always played it with my group of friends, so again, maybe there's some bias on that element, but I actually rather did enjoy the Division. I thought that even like when I played it a little bit by myself to get I think I got the platinum in it. I might have, yeah. Just to run around and do stuff. I thought it was pretty fun. It was an interesting sort of a deal, but shooter-looter games generally aren't my forte. I'm not a super huge fan of them, and for the most part, I kind of would just prefer if well, I mean, they're making a movie, but I wonder what they could do with a game that is basically designed to be like 90% game, because when I played through Borderlands 1, I basically got carried. My friend basically carried me through the story, and I more or less didn't contribute almost anything to it at all. So that's not to say it's bad or anything. It's just certainly not my forte. It's not my preferred type of game. But in any event, I don't know how that movie's going to do, and honestly, we'll just have to see. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is available on Switch until March 31st, 2021. Now, this was obviously better when it was... When was this posted? The source I have for this? December? It's going to be like December, probably. Yeah, it's from December. In fact, it's so long ago the account is now suspended. That's nice. Thank you, Twitter. Suspending all the awful, evil accounts, obviously. So if there's time of listening to this, and hopefully by the time this goes up, which will be ideally Sunday the 14th, March 2021, you will still have at least about 2 weeks to grab it, give or take. So I recommend it. I actually got it for free using my gold coin points, so I didn't have to pay anything. I basically got a free game for buying other games, of course, but whatever. I mean, at least I didn't have to pay out directly for it, which is kind of nice. Casey Hudson and Mark Dara are leaving BioWare. Dragon Age 4 and Mass Effect Legendary Edition will continue development as normal. Now, for those of you who don't know, they've been at BioWare for quite a long time. I think this is really kind of like the death throes of BioWare in a lot of ways. I think a lot of things really are signaling that BioWare is certainly ailing, if not really, really on the end of their leash. Casey Hudson was the general manager of BioWare, and Mark Dara was the executive producer on the upcoming Dragon Age, which was Dragon Age 4. So that's a pretty big L to hold already, given that they are ailing on developing Dragon Age 4. They are very far behind. Or not very far behind, but they're very much in the hole. It was recently announced that they would make it a single player only game. I guess I'm gonna go ahead of the script a little bit and spoil that Mass Effect Andromeda. I'm sorry, not Mass Effect Andromeda. Anthem Next, which was the reboot of Anthem that was announced and talked about from here and there, has basically been shuttered. Anthem is done. It's a dead project after 7, 8, 9 years of them working on it and trying to sell it to little to no acclaim. Again, another shooter-looter. Anthem is shuttered. I famously, not obviously famously relative, but one of my favorite podcasts, and probably one of the bigger ones I've had, was talking about Anthem just getting completely kiboshed, Anthem getting completely murdered in its sleep, basically, which I think is equal parts hilarious as it is depressing in a way. I think that there's certainly a lot of stuff that they could have done better for Anthem. And it just shows that BioWare is a company, as I read with the Jason Schreier article a long time ago, I think I have it open right here, how BioWare's Anthem went wrong. I forget, I can't tell when it was posted because it says today, which could be any day. April 2nd, 2019 at 11 a.m. I've had this open for 2 years, yes. BioWare has just been a disaster. And I went heavily into depth with this about how people opened up about the stress and the crunch time and the everything that goes on at BioWare. And it was a very fun article to read, I'll tell you that. But it was a very, very exciting article to sort of dig into. I think that they have a really, really bad culture at BioWare, and it's still ailing them to this day. If I remember correctly, there was a point in this article where they said they wanted Inquisition to fail so that way people would ask what's wrong. They did things like they thought Andromeda was going to be great, and then Andromeda got memed on and was basically trashed by pretty much almost everyone, and then plot lines were killed off because the DLC was killed off because the game wasn't finished and just felt terrible to play, and so on and so forth. And they wanted to avoid Anthem falling into the same meme experience. So I'm going to say the same thing now that I said back then. By dodging Anthem running into the meme experience, Anthem is now a dead game. So congrats, I guess. If that's really what you want to do, you accomplished it. Although I'm not sure how great of an accomplishment that might be. You've done it all the same. And congratulations, I guess. So beyond that, Anthem or BioWare has a lot of problems. A lot. And I don't know what's going to happen with Dragon Age 4. The Mass Effect Andromeda, or the Mass Effect Collection, is already having things like Miranda's ass getting censored, which, again, I understand the line of thinking that a lot of people have where they say, well, it shouldn't really affect the game. If that's really what it took for you to not care about the game, then I guess you really didn't care about it at all, which I kind of find to be like fluff deflections, because if they're willing to censor something like that, which you could even make a pretty decent argument that it's a part of her characterization that she was genetically modified to be the perfect woman, and they're not going to fix other known glitches possibly, then I'm going to say that that's kind of bullshit, and it was definitely something that bothered them before, which is funny because they were the same company when Fox had that very infamous segment where they proclaimed that BioWare is like making sex games where all you do is bang aliens, which was a complete fluff piece, because the reality of it is that the sex scene in Mass Effect 1, and this is how far back you have to go, it was like in 2007 they ran this, 2008, was a once in a game thing that you have to build up to, and you can say no to and still maintain the relationship for. So really, it's kind of sad to see. It's basically that one meme with the dog that's like super proud and super buff, and then the dog that's like sad and pathetic and sitting down. That's basically what BioWare has become in that aspect. And there better not be any other real glitches at all for the Legendary Edition, especially since they're basically completely overhauling Mass Effect 1. There should be no reason that glitches don't get patched out or don't get changed or don't get modified. That just should not be a thing that happens at all. If they're willing to start making edits to scenes just because maybe a couple journalists or a couple check marks somewhere got annoyed at, which is a load of bullshit, and you and I both know it. I think that definitely could change by far, and maybe they will, maybe they won't, who knows. They might just literally dump this, and the other thing it opens up is if they're willing to change something as mundane and not gameplay critical or breaking as the size or circumference of a character's ass in one shot of the game, or maybe it's her whole model. I'm going to assume it's her whole model everywhere. Then imagine what they won't, or imagine what they are changing, and just as much as imagine what they should change but won't. And that's really what's going to probably annoy the shit out of me. And you might say, well, you don't know, the game's not out yet. It's EA. Their publisher is EA. There basically hasn't been a game under EA in the last decade and a half that hasn't been fucked up in some manner, some way. There wasn't some fine print bullshit, or the game wasn't some fucked up mess just designed to milk money out of people who like the game. And you're not going to convince me otherwise on this, because the long list of companies they've murdered, games they forced to have different things, Dead Space 3 having co-op, Sim City, Battlefront 2 locking heroes, Battlefront 1 having less content than the original Battlefronts. Trying to think, what else did they have? Andromeda, the existence of Andromeda, Mass Effect 3's original ending debacles, which were tied into the multiplayer element, which thankfully they're removing. So I'm sure that, what was it, GMS and EMS? I'm sure EMS is going completely out the window in Mass Effect 3, which is good. That would actually make it the definitive version of the game to play. What else? Anthem, we just talked about that. There's so many things that they do colossally wrong that you're not going to really convince me otherwise that this isn't some sort of... It definitely has all the telltale signs of a fucked up EA launch, and who even knows, right? Like, at this point, Mirror's Edge, what was the Mirror's Edge, the new one that's never getting a sequel? Literally anything that happened to Medal of Honor, which they axed to make Battlefield better. Battlefield 5, Battlefield 4 at launch. Like, just the list goes on and on and on. At this point, I've been talking about EA on this podcast for basically like 8 years almost. It's like 7.5. This will be year 8. So I think there's a lot to critique about them. I think there's a lot that they do wrong, not to mention all the online passes, the loot boxes, the everything that they have, the microtransactions out the ass, games that are incomplete. Come on, give me a fucking break. Which is why I will feel bad for Respawn when inevitably they get fucked over. But that'll happen someday. But I think BioWare is going to get fucked over first. But BioWare has had it a long time coming. And that's unfortunate for the smaller people at BioWare who are just trying to do a normal job. Whereas the higher-ups are actively screwing them over. Did I mess up my mic? I don't think so. Okay. The Game Awards happened. That's how old this is. Sephiroth is in Smash Ultimate now. Perfect Dark is getting a new game. I'm not sure if it's a sequel or not, or if it's a remake, a reboot, a remaster, whatever. Back 4 Blood has a release date. This is the Left 4 Dead game. Well, it's the Left 4 Dead type of game made by the Left 4 Dead devs. It will release on June 22nd, 2021, which is pretty cool. The Callisto project is releasing in 2022, which has been announced. And Arc 2 will feature Vin Diesel, which was probably the funniest part about it. I wasn't sure what the hell was really going on. The Game Awards was a very interesting mess and a very nice take on a lot of things, which is cool. Evil Dead is getting a game, which is cool for, I know, at least one person who's really into Evil Dead. And Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection, which has already come out, is a nice little thing. Retro Studios is still looking for boss and AI designers for Metroid Prime 4, which is a tragedy because this game is going to be in development hell, which is almost inconceivable given the fact that the original Metroid Prime trilogy came out over the course of 5 years across 2 different platforms. And as much shit as I give Metroid Prime 3 for basically being a pseudo Halo game, it still was a fun game. It's still an interesting game. And really, it just shows that Nintendo does not really give a shit about Metroid, and it's almost like they're keeping it alive out of spite, because they know it's one of their, like, B-tier franchises, definitely high to mid-B tier, and a lot of people still like it. And when it does come out, it sells very well in the States. And I don't know, it seems like Nintendo has been actively trying to kill off some of their old stuff, giving them, like, ultimatums to do and sell well, and stuff like that, but luckily, I guess, nothing has really met that fate yet, besides maybe Mother and F-Zero, and to a certain degree, maybe Star Fox. I think Metroid is a little too big to fail, which is good, but at the same time, you would never see a Zelda game have this problem. Ever. It doesn't matter. You would never see it. It would just never happen. You would never see a Mario game have this problem. I'm not going to sit here and say that, well, Nintendo will eventually only sell Mario, Pokemon, Kirby, Zelda, Animal Crossing, and maybe one more that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. And you know, obviously all the Mario adjacent things like Kart, Mario sports games, and Smash and whatnot. But let's be real here. Let's be really, really real. They really treat a lot of their secondhand things like garbage, and it really is kind of sad to see that this many years after being announced, the game is still ailing to just find any amount of basic stuff for it. The fact that they had to not only restart development on it, essentially, and these are the people who made the original trilogy, which was award-winning. A lot of people consider Metroid Prime 1 to be one of the greatest games of all time. I am among them, and I personally consider Metroid Prime 2 to really be a great game. I just think that it needed a couple things, and it would have been better than the original, but that's neither here nor there. It's disappointing. Just to say the least. As a Metroid fan, you constantly kind of live with disappointment and just sadness. Probably for what's the biggest beef, I guess, of the whole ordeal, our good friends at Sony and Microsoft followed suit, as well as I think Steam, basically anywhere this game was sold. They all offered refunds for Cyberpunk 2077. And the fall of Cyberpunk, probably just to really shortly summarize it, is they had a bunch of delays. They pretty much knew this game was not going to run on 8th generation hardware, but they still forced it anyway just because more copies on more consoles equals more sales. I mean, that's just general logic would dictate that the more things something is available on, unless you're like Nintendo and can basically urge people to get your stuff specifically, the more people are going to want to buy it because it's accessible to them. That's why everything goes multi-plat for the most part now. Why sell to one audience, regardless of how big the console base is, when you could sell to 4 potentially between all the consoles and various PC ports and stuff. And Cyberpunk 2077, I think they also wanted to stabilize the stock price was the running theory as well. And ultimately what it did was just kind of murder the game. They unfortunately killed their own game through basically greed. And it's really sad because a lot of people were really looking forward to this. You know, the more stuff that came out about the game, the more that they got into it, the more that they were willing to try to, more people wanted to buy it just to, you know, check it out and see what's what. And I think it's unfortunate for them and a lot of other people that the game has met with such a lukewarm fate. It's really kind of sad that it's such a buggy mess. Obviously, there's people like Crowbcat who have documented this extensively in very succinct videos, so I'm not going to get too much into it here, but so much of it was cut. It's another one of those games where they overpromised and underdelivered, and you literally always do the reverse of that, just so that way it makes people happy, because I think people are justified. Now, is there $60 of content in the game? Yes. Can you beat the game? Well, assuming your save file didn't get too big, yes. So the game is not the worst launch ever. I think a lot of people like to, you know, jump on it a little too harshly, but people were able to beat the game. It's still a beatable game. It might just be running a little rough, but other than that, I do kind of agree with them. The game was definitely nowhere near what they wanted, and especially given how much people gassed up this studio based on The Witcher and other games, I feel kind of bad for them. You know, there's definitely more room for them to have done better, and the fact that so many companies were willing to offer full refunds, regardless of how much time you spent playing the game, is more or less unprecedented that I could think of, especially for such a high-profile game. So I guess fair is fair, right? Like, I can't really say too much about it other than wow. Now that's a fuck up. And that's a fuck up that probably will be a stain on gaming history, because not even No Man's Sky got this kind of refund policy. The only game I could think that maybe got it was like Afro Samurai 2, which was already a late, very delayed sequel to already what was a niche title. They had a Resident Evil showcase. They showed off Resident Evil Village, which is basically RE8, but they're not calling it RE8 for various reasons. It will release on May 7th, 2021. There is also a Netflix live-action show coming out that will basically re-encapsulate the first 2 games, which of course brings me to my nice point of what about the third game, because the third game is basically a sequel to the first game more so than the second game, and then the third game also has very important plot details that the remake basically kind of all threw away, because the remake was kind of shitty in that regard, but whatever, cool. Resident Evil or RE-Verse is like an online versus game mode, which will be kind of cool if you want to play. It has a nice weird art style, which I think is unique. I don't know. I'm not really very interested in it. Resident Evil is kind of a single player experience for me. I'll be a little bit biased about that. I don't think Resident Evil really translates too well to online. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about that. Basically, the main meat of it was showing off Resident Evil 8. Ubisoft will develop an open-world Star Wars game, which is basically rumored to be a new Knights of the Old Republic game. It will be made without BioWare's involvement, and because Ubisoft is obviously not EA, basically Disney has terminated EA's exclusivity clause, which EA was the sole group that had the rights to publish and produce and make and develop any Star Wars games. That's basically over. So, tough tits to EA. I think that they fucked up too much with basically Battlefront 2. And even though Fallen Order was good, I think, I do kind of feel for them. Not really, actually. Fuck that. I take that back. Why would I feel bad for them? So, yeah. That's pretty much it for that. And hopefully Ubisoft does well. Now, will they? Who knows? And that's the honest answer. I don't know. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. Bethesda, and I think Machine Games in particular, are making an Indiana Jones game, so that'll be kind of interesting. You know, Indiana Jones is such a famous product, it's such a famous franchise, and yet they've never made a single game for it. Or no, they have, but they haven't made one in a long time. I take it back. I remember because Battlefront 2 actually has a trailer for an Indiana Jones game that no one remembers, and I certainly have never heard of. They have the Lego Indiana Jones games, if that counts, but yeah, besides that. Other than that, I guess the remaining topics here aren't too many. Oh, no, that's 100% a lie. Well, it's like a half lie. So Vicarious Visions has merged into Blizzard. Fair enough, I think. Xbox Live's price is set to go up, or was set to go up rather, but they backed down. So what happened is over the course of about a day or two after they announced this change, they decided that due to backlash, basically, immediately from the entire gaming sphere, they would not increase Xbox Live Gold pricing. As a side note, free-to-play games that require online will no longer require you to have gold, which is something that should have happened a while ago. But, fair is fair. So on one hand, I want to, praise them for actually listening to their community. And don't worry, I'm going to get to the downside of it. But for what it's worth, they did listen to the community. Unlike Sony and now recently Take-Two basically saying, yeah, people are ready to pay $70 for games. Unlike those clowns, they at least were willing to concede ground. They'll make it up somewhere else probably, but at least for the most part, Microsoft, I kind of like some of the stuff they're doing between the backwards compatibility and now, not increasing Xbox Live. I mean, granted, I don't pay for Xbox Live anyway, but, that's just the general gist of it that I would like to point out is that, they did listen, right? Like, how many times do companies just say, this is the final and go fuck yourself? And I mean, it's a lie. It's quite often. So, for what it's worth, good. Now, on the flip side, they're behind in this generation, right? Like, Nintendo will always have their niche. Sometimes it does really well. Sometimes it does okay. And Sony is leading, again, mostly because Microsoft just does not have the exclusives out at the moment to really compete with them. And unfortunately, the start of a console generation really sets a tone for the remainder of the console generation. Most people will buy a console and they will stick with it, and they will usually only keep one, and that's it. Like, there's not a lot of room for, well, I'm going to get this or I'm going to do that. No, they generally just buy one and stick with it. So Microsoft does really need to catch up. They need to start pounding out games, and it's not a matter of capital with them. It's a matter of finding the games and the stuff to do it. And if you want my honest opinion, they need to bring back Scalebound. It'll never happen, depending who owns the rights and the licensing, but they should. They should bring stuff like that back. Stuff that was originally, a head-turner that didn't just disappear after a year or two. Yeah, here it is. EA will decide this week whether or not to kill Anthem, week starting February 7th, 2021. Yeah, they have, as I said earlier. It's a shame. I'm not going to feel bad, though. I'm going to spit on that grave just because. But they have. They decided it wasn't worth the time and the investment, basically, for them to continue trying to develop for it and basically get little to nothing out of it. So fair is fair. Good riddance. It wasn't a very good game anyway, so it's not really going to be missed, in my opinion. But I know at least one person who was willing to play it. But as I said, it's not really a game that had any notable direction. When I think about games, right? Like, I'm going to give an example. Final Fantasy XIV has at least a story that they want to tell. At the bare minimum, they have a story. They have an end game. You do the end game. And then there's obviously, extra harder challenges and stuff that you gear up for. And that's, the general gist of a lot of these games, right? This is basically the MMO formula. And I'm sure MMOs weren't the first game to do it. I'm just going to attribute it to it because everyone kind of knows how World of Warcraft plays. You complete whatever your campaign is for whatever expansion or storyline, in this case, for a game like Borderlands, Destiny, Anthem, Division, etc., etc. You complete whatever campaign you got. You get to the end. And then, like MMOs, you basically spend the rest of your time in between patches gearing up. Acquiring better gear by doing weeklies and dailies and things that give you usually some amount of currency that you then redeem, or making progress in a raid and clearing fights in a raid in order to get checkpoints so you can continue and stuff like that. And there's a way to do it, and there's a way to not do it. And I think that's it. Like, for MMOs, it works because MMOs are kind of time sinky, so you can kind of end up just doing that, it just kind of works out with MMOs. Whereas for shooters where you pay $60 up front, I mean, technically in the long run, right, you pay less if you pay 60 in the, I don't know, whatever expansion. But the thing about MMOs is they have longevity, they have lasting appeal. It's very hard to craft, which is why there's kind of only like 4 big ones on the market at the moment. But with shooter looters, I mean, the gameplay is already more washed out, washed down, because again, it's an FPS. You can't have really super complex mechanics in it to begin with, without either making the game too difficult or too easy, generally the latter. And in general, it's not a very great formula. It doesn't really like mass appeal itself to big groups of encounters and enemies that require a lot of teamwork and effort. Just generally because, you know, one, there's not really a type box where you can communicate, and just two, it's just not a formula I think that anyone has really figured that out for yet. Whereas with MMOs, you know, they figured that out back in 2004, 2005. So it kind of made more sense back then. So in general, I just think that Anthem just unfortunately suffered from a lack of identity. They wanted to try to make like a Destiny third-person shooter with Iron Man flying, and for the longest they couldn't even figure out if the flying would be a part of the game. And ultimately it was, in my opinion, a detriment to have flying in that game as early as they did, because, and I say this about pretty much every game that has flying in an open world like this, once you unlock the ability to fly, you basically have de-incentivized people to walk anywhere. And it's not even because of a laziness element necessarily, it's because of a time element and just an ease of access element, right? Like, after, even if it's flying 2 feet, most people will generally choose to fly just because it's easier and it's faster. So for what it's worth, like, you know, it wasn't really worth it in my mind, and I do kind of feel bad for them, but it is what it is, right? You know, you can only go one way up from here, and unfortunately, well, it's EA, so they'll probably find a way to go down. Sonic the Hedgehog 2, it has a movie in development, which is due out in 2022. It's kind of funny because in 2020, that was the last movie I saw before the lockdowns. And in 2022, this will probably be the first movie I'll see post-lockdowns, implying that they'll ever end. Let's be real here. But definitely I'm interested in seeing Sonic the Hedgehog 2. They made a comment that Resident Evil 8 draws on Resident Evil 4 a ton. I mean, yes, I kind of guessed that, especially since they're remaking Resident Evil 4. I'm sure that they're going to probably reuse assets or do something with regards to Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 8. This whole game feels like a throwback and a hallmark to Resident Evil 4, which is basically like Capcom's golden hour. It's considered one of the best games of all time. You'll probably hear that a lot. I mean, you know, most people, when they think of best games of all time, think of things like Doom, Ocarina, Mario 64, GoldenEye, Final Fantasy VII, but there's a lot of games from the 6th generation, I think, that get overlooked on a routine basis that also deserve that title. And Resident Evil 4 pioneered pretty much almost 2 whole genres, both the action horror genre and the third-person shooter genre, all in one. And in my opinion, I think it's Shinji Mikami's finest work. I think it's also Capcom's finest work to make a game that does so much right at the same time, but also kind of tanked the rest of it. Pretty much almost screwed over horror a little bit, but it also was really just a perfect evolution. And honestly, I think even some of the beta versions of oh crap, I backed out. What happened? I think some of the beta versions of Resident Evil 4 even sound pretty good, and I would love to see, you know, maybe an indie dev or something make a take on it. That would be pretty cool. Why is this being so weird right now? Why are you like this? Thank you. There was a Nintendo Direct, the first Direct in a long time. Just to go over really quickly what the general gist of it is. They announced that Pyra and Mythra will be in Smash, which is cool in my opinion. It's cool to see Xenoblade get more fighters, although Rex is basically cucked at this point to having a Mii costume, which is pretty tragic. Not even like a Shulk costume, you know, like he's like an Echo fighter for Shulk or anything. It's pretty rough, I'm not gonna lie. Fall Guys is coming to the Switch. Famicom Detective Club is getting 2 games, which is coming to the Switch. Samurai Warriors 5, but that's a multi-plat. Legend of Mana, Monster Hunter Rise, Mario Golf Super Rush, which is June 25th. Tales from the Borderlands, Capcom Arcade Collection, which is actually pretty cool. Stubbs the Zombie, No More Heroes 3 has a release date on August 27th. Neon White, DC Supergirls, Plants vs. Zombies, Battle for Neighborville complete. Miitopia is getting a game for some reason. This is what they work on instead of other games that, you know, I would really like. Fire Emblem, that was the other big one that Nintendo will make, because now Fire Emblem sells like crazy. It basically sells Metroid numbers, which is kind of cool. Project Triangle Strategy, which is, in my opinion, the one to really look out for, is launching in 2022. Now, obviously, this will not be its final name. It's made by the same studio that does Bravely Default and Octopath, which I think will be pretty cool. Star Wars Hunters, again, the license for Star Wars is just all over the place now. Good job, EA. World's End Club, Hades, Ninja Gaiden Sigma Master Collection, which is coming out June 10th. More battles for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, including the expansion pass, which will be pretty cool, because I'm looking forward to it. I really much love Hyrule Warriors, and especially Fire Emblem Warriors. Bravely Default 2, which is already out, and I've actually started a playthrough on it, which you can see eventually when I get around to rendering it. Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection, Saga Frontier Remastered, Apex Legends, Breath of the Wild 2 news coming later. However, Skyward Sword HD is dropping on July 16th. Now, I have seen people criticize the price tag, and I do kind of agree. I think it's ridiculous. For me, since I never bought the game, I'm just going to get it anyway. I never bought the game when it was new. I think I was loaned it. I bought it later, but used, and I don't have a Wii expansion, whatever bullshit, because I kind of didn't care about the Wii. In case you've been around on my channel for longer than 5 minutes, yeah, I pretty much skipped that whole generation of games just because. And Splatoon 3 is coming sometime in 2022. Other than that, they had BlizzCon 2021, which is cool. Now, for BlizzCon, I could talk about the state of play. Yeah, so Nintendo released this Direct, and basically the Direct was released to kind of lukewarm reception, mostly because there was no Breath of the Wild 2 news, no Bayonetta 3 news, and no Metroid news. The latter two are fine. I feel like Breath of the Wild 2, I can give them a pass on for the most part, since they did say they would have news later this year, and they are re-releasing what was originally like Zelda's 25th anniversary game on, like, what is it now, the 35th anniversary? That's how long it's been since this game came out. It's literally been 10 years. However, what I will say about... What I will say about Breath of the Wild 2 is, I mean, like, whatever they got, hopefully it's good. You know, I have a lot of critiques of the first game, but I still very much enjoy it. But I didn't think the Nintendo Direct was bad overall. I think they announced a pretty good amount of stuff. Between the expansion pass for Hyrule, Bravely Default 2, Triangle Strategy. Well, Bravely Default 2 wasn't announced there, but, you know, they had basically like a couple good games announced and a couple things, and mostly third-party ports. But, I mean, I think as all things go, as a Direct, it wasn't that terrible, if you want my honest opinion. Now, Sony decided to one-up them and basically have a state of play with basically nothing in it, and that's why, even on here, I don't have anything put down for it, because basically nothing was revealed in it that we didn't already know. So, in my personal opinion, I just kind of glossed it over. I watched it, I streamed it, and I didn't get anything out of it, really. I think the only thing to come out of it, which I guess I'll add here in case in the future I ever come back to this, is that final... hold on. Well, I don't even know when it happened. It was like early 2021, whatever. The only thing that happened is FF7 got its DLC announced, which is only for PS5. I believe that if you buy the DLC, like, I'm not even sure how it works. They offered it for free as part of PlayStation Plus. And basically it was obviously bait. If you get it for PlayStation Plus, you play it, you like it. If you pay $30, you can upgrade it to the PS5 version. Of course, right now, PlayStation 5s are pretty rare, so a lot of people probably can't even get to this DLC, which is only coming on it. It's going to feature Yuffie and someone else by the name of Sonon, who I don't even remember who he is, if he isn't even a new character to begin with. So, in my opinion, they are milking this. I really have no interest, because, again, the original game came out... and was a complete game, a full game, and maybe if they had divvied it up into twos, I'd be a little more receptive, but because they're just basically trying to overly milk it now, I really don't care too much for it, and in my opinion, I'm fine skipping it, or at least waiting for it to get a super uber collection, as you know it will. So in any event, that's kind of what I think about that. BlizzCon happened. They announced Burning Crusade Classic, which I'm kind of cool with because I'm a huge fan of Burning Crusade. So maybe I'll look into that, maybe level a character or two. Shadowlands Chains of Damnation might have had the funniest trailer I think I've ever seen. Without spoiling it too much, well, I can't really talk about it without spoiling it. Someday I'll talk about it. You know what? Okay. If you followed Shadowlands, you follow the WoW plotline, basically Sylvanas has betrayed the Horde, and not only the Horde, but Azeroth to work for someone for some reason. And in this trailer, she just has nothing but regret in her eyes as she brainwashes, what's his name? I don't even remember. I'm a Horde player. And in my mind, it's like, we are not about to write a redemption story and a redemption arc for a character who didn't even, like, it's the most forced betrayal ever. And if it's literally a reusing of the same plot line that they led off of Cataclysm and into Mist of Pandaria and then Warlords of Draenor with, it just feels reused and forced and overly done, especially like when you do the same thing twice. Horde War Chief does something really fucking stupid, betrays the Horde, Horde has to reform and do a bunch of crazy shit, and now there's like a new existential plot that they have to fight against. It's the same, literally the same plot line done again, and in my opinion, it's pretty lame. I'm kind of sick of it at this point. They announced Diablo 4, which will have a new class, the Rogue, which is pretty cool, because I actually did like Diablo 3. Diablo 2 Resurrected got announced, as well as more news about Diablo Immortal. Chun-Li and Ryu will be joining Fortnite's roster, which is pretty sweet. Sure. Beyond that, what else do I have? Lastly, for what I have here, in what might be one of the most manufactured pieces of drama that I think I've ever seen video games journalists do, the Hogwarts Legacy producer quit after a history of anti-social justice videos, specifically ones critical of people like Anita Sarkeesian. Basically, the way that this worked out is that mainstream video game media decided that, hey, this guy, they uncovered his past, and I mean, needless to say, I think we're all kind of in the clear here if we say that most of the Harry Potter fan base is generally pretty heavy towards this, especially after J.K. Rowling's famous TERF comments, which were just anything but delightful for them, I imagine. And they more or less drove this guy completely out of the game. And now they say he quit. Now, realistically, do I think that that's the official story? Yeah, they're going to run with it. Do I think that's the real story? No, not really. I think that he was more or less given a choice of either writing it out and probably tanking the game or just leaving and bowing out early and gracefully. And I do feel kind of bad for him in that, in that they basically dug up his past, you know, stuff that I wouldn't even say are necessarily illegal, definitely not illegal, or definitely not even unsaucy takes. A lot of people have been very critical of Anita Sarkeesian over the years, and a lot of it is a very long washed off thing, because now she's only really relevant when she talks about female armor in video games, which is really just a tragedy. And I really kind of feel like it's more cancel culture at work, which is fantastic. Because that's totally what people deserve when they're trying to make the best game possible, is that they deserve to be run off because of the political beliefs that they have while making the product. Not even, I would even argue, political beliefs that necessarily are downright evil or terrible or awful, like certain historical groups. But pretty much they manufactured the drama and then they ran it through, and then they were like, wow, look, see, he was gotten rid of by the crowd, which in my mind is them just flat out saying, well, we basically manipulated people into finding this out. We manipulated them into thinking that it was awful and terrible, and then we ran them off the fucking project because of it. And look, see, this is what the people wanted. But that's just modern day media at this point. I mean, if you would say that it's been getting worse since 2014 and 2012, I would agree with you. It's very much way worse than it was back then. I think 4 years of Trump and 4 years of a lot of stuff has just had some people high on fucking crack almost. And it's a shame. It's a shame that people get run off projects just because of their political views, which have basically nothing to do with the project at all. Whereas in certain other projects, people clearly have agendaed writing and clearly have things that are not in the best interest of the product, and it's very obvious, and you can see it almost from a mile away, and you can smell it from even further out, and those things just go through and they're fine, and people sit on a ledge and defend it all day and say it's cool, as it divvies up the fan base even more. But I mean, whether or not this would divvy up and what actual effect they would have had, I guess we'll never know, because it's been pretty much cut in the bud way early on. So it's unfortunate, but that's just how things are. And I mean, it's really kind of a shame. But in any event, that's all I really have for this episode. I would like to make this kind of a weekly thing, even if there's not really anything to talk about. I'd like to